Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Cinderbrandt, and continuing our, I would say, lucky streak of bringing you a diverse set of really interesting people to learn more about. Today, I'm really happy to welcome a gentleman by the name of Garr Russell. Garr is the chief fire starter, an interesting title, of an outfit called Fireside RV Rental. And going through several iterations in his life, which I want to hear about, he ended up in something where he describes his ability to basically arbitrage recreational vehicles owned by other people. A successful franchise developer, has many, many locations across the country, but there's some other things, Garr, that happened before this version of yourself emerged. And I want to welcome you to my podcast and take me back a little bit. Take me back as far as you want, as far as you care to, as to how you arrived at this, what I think is a pretty unique and interesting idea.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. First of all, Gary, I love sharing my story in hopes that it can encourage other entrepreneurs. And as far as take me back as far as you want, in my two books ago, I wrote a book called My Real Estate Story. And the subtitle is From Lawnmowers to RVs. And so the lawnmowers, that was fifth grade. That was my first business proposal that I brought to my dad. I needed $500 to start my first business. And my dad kind of laughed at me, called me lazy. And that was my first pitch, and it didn't go that far.
Didn't go that well.
It didn't go that well, no. But you know what's cool in hindsight? Just a couple of years ago, I realized what my dad was saying to me was, "Hey, son, go push a lawnmower, figure out how to do that first, figure out the business before you bring on some employees," and isn't that like us dreamers, right? We go right to the, I need some money to build a team for this business, and we've never done the thing ourselves yet. So it was a good learning lesson. So that was my first business venture that involved wheels, of lawnmowers. And then, fast forward to today, I started Fireside in 2016. I call it a pain to purpose venture. My business before that was similar, a pain to purpose venture. I'd started a credit counseling company. I'd fixed my own credit. After I gave my life to the Lord in 2003, I had a bunch of credit to fix up from all my, what I call my BC choices. And so I had a successful credit counseling company. But in fast forward to 2016, I bought my wife a travel trailer for our 10-year wedding anniversary. She was 7 months pregnant and chasing our toddler. And we're at a campground in Grand Haven, Michigan in the middle of July. And she is miserable, and she says she's going home. And I thought, oh my gosh, you're going home. I just bought this $25,000 camper and you're going home. So there I sat around the campfire feeling sorry for myself. But I thought, you know what? I'd build a decent real estate portfolio and some other stuff. I thought, I'm going to rent this thing out. So I threw it up on Craigslist. And literally, Gary, within a couple hours, people are messaging me wanting to use my camper for their family getaway.
So did you buy that camper for yourself or for your wife?
I bet you're the second person to ask me that question. Now, I was on a podcast for a franchise that specializes in franchise opportunities. He's like, "Was that really for you, your wife,
Right.
or for you?" And I was like, "I don't know. I guess I think I have the same answer for you I have for him." I'm like, "I don't know. I guess I've never been asked that." So in my mind, I thought it was for her.
So you rented it on the spot, couple hours, and then how'd the idea from there develop? Did you start to tap in demand that you didn't know was there, or what happened next?
Yeah, so literally the light bulb went off. I had built a decent real estate portfolio, so I was familiar with, renting and how all that worked and stuff, and rental contracts and different things of that nature. So I thought, all right, well, I'm gonna rent some other RVs. So I thought, well, my best friend has an RV. Why don't I ask him if he wants me to rent out his RV? So I asked him, and he said, "Yeah, that sounds amazing." Then I asked my sister-in-law, thinking she's going to say the same thing, and she said, "That is like a horrible idea. Why would I let somebody sleep in the bed of my camper? Like that's just gross." So, I had one in and one out, and I asked a couple others, and then fast forward to uh, my wife is giving birth to our daughter Isabella a couple months later. And all of I'm saying this to justify what I did next, Gary. All four of our kids were born via C-section. So if
Okay.
you've ever had any
Wow.
C-section babies, it's like, it's very structured, right? You go check in at this time, and then an hour later you're back, and then you're checked into your room, and it's just, the process.
Yeah.
So I say all that to justify what I did after this. So I checked my wife and daughter back into the room after baby number four. And then I say, all right, honey, I'll be right back. And she said, well, where are you going? I was on my way to the dealership to buy five more RVs. That's where I was
Whoa.
going. Did that make it sound any better or no?
I'm sure that's when you said I'll be right back. That's all she needed to know.
Yeah. So I went to the dealership. I bought some more RVs, but clear as day, as I went and did that, I heard the Lord just whisper to my heart, use other people's RVs, use other people's assets. And nowadays you see it's such a common thing with Airbnb arbitrage, with Turo. Heck, people are renting their swimming pools out now. It's amazing. Pretty much you name it, you can rent it from somebody. You can rent their driveway. You can rent their yard for your dog to run around. I mean, all the things. So I listened to that still small voice, and I started to reach out to others. And then I quickly grew. It was 5, 10, 15, 20 RVs. And then just like anything else in the world, there's a Facebook group for it. So I stumbled on some Facebook groups of other individuals who are renting their RVs. And there's websites just like, there's Airbnb and
Sure.
Turo. There's RV Share and Outdoorsy. Those are kind of the two major peer-to-peer platforms. So I joined some Facebook groups that those platforms had, and I just started conversing with people and just kind of adding value. And I had a guy in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan say, "Hey, why don't you start one up here? I'll start it for you." And so I said, all right, perfect. Well, you let me practice on you of starting this location, and I won't charge anything. I'll teach you everything I know, and we'll give it a go. And sure enough, it went great. And so 6 months later, I started selling a business in a box. I think I started at like 9.95 for the business in the box. And then 6 months later, it's 4,995. And then a year later, it's 10,000. And then I just finally, it got to a point of where I had about 10, 12 locations. And I realized it wasn't a business in a box. I was operating a franchise model.
Right.
So then I just went ahead and I went through that long, expensive process of becoming an actual, FTC regulated franchise opportunity. And we did that about 3 years ago. And fast forward to today, we've got 70 locations now across the
Wow.
country.
So walk me through, if you would, the economics on that. I mean, it's funny because we're in an economy where I think obviously the employment landscape changes all the time, but with the advent of obviously faster connectivity, better AI tools, we see these creative businesses, these gig type businesses really emerging non-traditionally. And when they hit, I'm always, yours is almost like a SaaS business, a software as a service business, because you can add capacity without necessarily adding inventory or supplemental cost, because you're really just working through connectivity. So walk me through that franchise model, Gar. How does that all work? What's in it for the franchise owners? What's in it for you? How do people access it and actually get a hold of one of these things? And I'm assuming you're talking about self-contained RVs that 30, 40 footers that people have to know how to drive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that is the beauty of this business model. We're selling an experience to the consumer, which I love because as AI and technology continues to grow, the experience industry is going to continue to grow, right? People are going to have more time. They're going to find ways to make money faster, quicker, automation, and they're going to want to go out and experience life. Like millennials, they want experiences. They don't care about ownership. They want to go out and experience everything. They're going to rent an Airbnb, rent a Turo, all those things. And so the cool thing about this business model for our franchisees is it's very low overhead because you're using somebody else's asset, well, somebody else's liability. You're helping them turn it into an asset, which is cool for the consumer because as soon as they start renting that RV through our management program, now they get to depreciate it under IRS tax code 178, same as you can a rental property. They get to write off, the insurance, the storage, the repairs, all those things. And then the cool thing about what we do as far as grouping them together and managing them for the owners is we just partner with a storage facility. So the owner is paying to store it at a facility that we're partnered with. So we don't have the cost of a brick and mortar. That is in step 5 of our success path. Once a franchisee gets to about 25 units and that all their owners are paying that, storage to a facility, then we start to walk down the road with them of, okay, do you want to actually include real estate in this now? Because now you can literally take your inventory, put it right into the real estate that you purchase, and you're covering, some or all of your note. Uh, the owners are paying for the maintenance. The renters are paying for the damages, the repairs. The renters are paying for the delivery of the RV if they get it delivered. The renter is paying for the cleaning of the RV, just like you would pay a cleaning fee at Airbnb. And then for the franchisee, it's really unique because, you make your management fee, which if you know anything about the real estate management world, you're typically, maybe 10, 15%, depending on how big your portfolio is. In this industry, we basically split the rental revenue with the RV owner. So it's a 50% management fee that you're collecting. So there's great margins there. Fireside corporately, we charge a 10% royalty fee. So you take that off and now you're getting a 40% management fee. But then there's also other ways to earn income, which this is a huge demand in the RV space, is actually working on RVs. You ever drive by like a Camping World or a La Mesa or something, and you see here's the lot with all the RVs, here's the sales room, and then there's like 30 bays behind
Yeah.
it, where there's just RVs lined up for days. Uh, RV repair there's a huge need, and it's a huge opportunity, even with our franchisees simply servicing their own fleet. So we actually are having our annual retreat in November down here in Okeechobee, Florida, where I live. And after the retreat, a bunch of our franchisees are hanging around and we're getting them certified as RV repair techs. So now they can add that on to the RV rental management piece. And then one other way to monetize is helping people sell their RVs. So to sell an RV on consignment, if you were to take it to a Camping World or somewhere like that, they're going to charge you a 10 to 15% consignment fee. So that's another way that our franchisees monetize.
So do the franchisees end up owning a fleet of RVs that they're renting out, or are they basically just accessing, like you would do with private aircraft, accessing someone else's that isn't being used and acting more in a brokerage capacity at that level?
Yeah, so some of our franchisees own some of their inventory, but the business model is really other people's assets. And so, like with RVs, people use them maybe 2, 3 times a year. Very, very seldom do they use them. So we're literally taking that RV into our possession and putting it at the storage facility where we're operating out of. Or some of our franchisees are running them right off their properties. They have acreage. And we've had some dealerships that have signed on with Fireside, that they're running their dealership, they're running their Fireside franchise. It's unique for them because they can take new inventory, rent it out, and then they can go ahead and depreciate it as well. Then they can throw it on their lot, sell it as used inventory. But most of our franchisees, 90% of their inventory is someone else's RV that they're managing for them when that person is not using it.
That's fascinating. Um, did you expect this would happen once you started to put a couple of these things together?
No, I had no idea it would grow as big as it has. And it was really one of my mentors, Russell Bronson, calls it a blue ocean. It was really a blue ocean experience because uh, the dealerships used to be heavy into rentals.
Yeah.
And then they all decided, well, we make more money on repairs and warranty work. Let's get rid of rentals and we'll just focus on that. So then it just left like the big corporate companies, like Cruise America, Road Bear, Almonte. And so it created this big void in the market. Well, then what happened in 2015 is a gentleman named John took his family RVing. He got back and he thought, well, now this thing's just going to sit in my driveway. I'm going to rent it out. So he went to try and find somewhere to rent it, and there wasn't anything. And that's how RV Share was birthed.
I see.
That I think John sold his shares of the company 5 years ago for 30, $40 million. So that's how RV Share was birthed. So, and then it just turned into this huge peer-to-peer market. And I just happened to come along right at the right time with Rent My RV and having the entrepreneurial experience that I had as far as coaching and mentoring
Sure.
and stuff like that. It just kind of was a perfect storm. It really was.
It's you kind of learn it as you go. And but your business, as I'm sure happened to a lot of businesses, took a bit of a smack when we got to the 2019, 2020, and nobody was going anywhere. How did you survive that? What was that like?
Yeah, COVID was really interesting for us on personally and business wise. Business is as soon as everything locked down, I'm scrolling Facebook one day and I see this article by that Jeff Cavins, the founder of Outdoorsy, shared, and it says top things CEOs wish they would have done in 2008. And the number one thing that they said is they wish they would have laid off staff sooner because they thought, well, it'll bounce back, temporary thing. And then they just, it didn't, for quite a time. And so as soon as I saw that article, I thought, you know what, I'm laying everybody off. I love Henry Ford says, I make quick, confident decisions and I change my mind, if at all, very slowly. And I love that quote by him. So I try to do that in business. I'm not an analysis paralysis kind of guy. I'm like, you know what? Let's just try it and we'll see. I love to say we're either winning or we're learning. We're not losing. We won or we just learned a lesson. So I thought I'm going to do it. So I laid off all my corporate team. And about 2 weeks after that, I get a call from Consumers Energy in Michigan. They needed 72 RVs as mobile quarantine units
Huh.
for all their electrical engineers at all their power plants.
Wow.
So it was this just amazing opportunity. I decided to leave my staff laid off and just orchestrate it all. And it worked out beautifully, Gary, because I facilitated that and I went and bought several rental properties with cash from the profits. And which was also neat because you couldn't do showings, you couldn't do inspections, like everything was shut down. Well, because of my real estate connections that I had, I knew the conditions of the properties and I was able to put a good offer in and get the property. So that worked out great. That's the cool part of the story. The bad part of the story, the which I call my COVID coma story, was right. I'm an extrovert. I love people, community, fellowship, talking, all those things. And the world was kind of shut down. And so I got very, very just passive on some parts of my business, looking at the numbers, different things like that. And I started drinking daily, like every day, just drinking. But I was one of those drinkers where you could justify it, like, okay, I'm not drunk driving, I'm not beating my wife or, slapping my kids around. I'm paying my bill. But what I was doing was I was actually slowly selling off that real estate. So this is, a year and a half or so after that big rental took place. Those properties in a year and a half, like the values just jumped quickly.
Yeah.
I had tenants in there and I started selling off these properties, and in my mind, I was justifying it. Like, yeah, I just bought that property for 75 grand. I just sold it for 175. Like, I just made a ton of money. That's amazing. Well, what I was doing with all that money was I was feeding it into my businesses to keep them afloat because I was so passive. I wasn't keeping an eye on my numbers. I was spending recklessly and drinking. And then I got COVID in end of May, beginning of June, and this is just over 2 years ago. And it just literally, I literally woke up. I started having suicidal thoughts. Like I gave my wife the code to our gun safe. I realized like, oh my gosh, I just sold off multiple seven figures of my real estate, which was basically my retirement plan, and I just, what is happening? I texted my CEO and fired them through text, like a complete whatever word you want to put in there. and and I started digging in my books and I realized like, oh my gosh, I was in this coma. Like I just completely just like slipped into. And so, but praise God, I was able to reconcile relationships and get all that figured out and move on. And at that time we had maybe 20-ish locations, and God used it all. He restored us. I learned some amazing lessons, and here we are today.
What was the point where you made that decision that the only direction you could go was up? What prevented you from just, entertaining some of those darker thoughts?
You know what it was I brought those thoughts to light. It was my wife. It was telling my wife, honey, I remember sitting in this chair in the corner of our room saying, I think we're about to lose it all. I made some mistakes. I've been super passive and this and that, and just told her. And she just, I don't even remember what she said, but she basically spoke the words of life that I needed to hear at the moment. Probably something like, honey, I'm not worried. You always figure things out, just, and, and she just encouraged me, spoke life, that we want our wives to speak to us. And and then I just really just pressed into God and grabbed a hold of a couple scriptures and a couple principles. And I just got with my accountant and we start digging into the books, doing the hard things, made some hard choices, and God brought us through. He restored us.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to argue that point, but I would tell you that from at least what I'm hearing, once you understood that you had to live outside yourself on behalf of others, which would be consistent with the opportunities you were bringing to your franchisees by way of example, because you were improving their lives as well. Sometimes we lose sight of what's closest to us that we need to do for them just as well. And it sounds like those words you qualify as kind of words of life were kind of a smack in the head to say, look, I've got faith in you. You can do. And I thought probably you look at yourself and you go, yeah, I can do this, but not necessarily just for yourself. It seemed like what you heard was you needed to be there on behalf of the people you really cared about. Is that fair?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And we had to make some hard choices. I upset a couple of our franchisees when I fired Tammy, our CEO. It was something I needed to do, but the way I did it was completely wrong. Obviously, I mean, I was half with it with COVID and just not thinking clearly, and I was actually a cool follow up to that. Earlier this year, I was actually able to send Tammy a severance package, and oh, so beautiful. Like I said, hey, check your PayPal, and just blew her mind. And then I got to share that with the rest of my corporate team who loved Tammy as much as I did. And so it was beautiful how we were able to come back and really pull together. And there was one franchisee of ours who we just finished helping her close down her location, who I tried to reconcile with her, and she was just so upset with me. There was no way around it. I was actually gonna, she's in Arizona. I was actually gonna fly out there. I had a ticket booked to fly out there. I said, I'm coming out there. We're gonna work this out. Like we'll get through this. We're gonna work it out. And 2 days before I was supposed to go, Isabella, who's now 8, her appendix burst.
Oh
And
boy.
so we ended up in the hospital, and she had to have her appendix removed and all that. And but that's the one that oh man, I tried so hard, and and I did everything I could, but it it is what it is now. She's
So where do you see this going from here, Garb? What's your end game? What's your strategy from here?
my strategy has always been before the last couple of years has always been start, scale, sell. That was my strategy, and really what God showed me a couple of years ago when I went through this whole COVID coma and comeback was I was just doing that to try to prove something to myself and something to the world. It 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 it, it really doesn't fit who he's created me to be and the calling that I have on my life. So now the strategy is totally different. Like you said, Gary, of thinking outside of myself, thinking about others in my family. Now Fireside, now I've got somebody that we're grooming to be a CEO that's in his young 30s, and he will groom my son Noah, who's 10, to take over eventually. And we're so intentional about it that literally Ben is his name. Ben even already does phone calls with my 10-year-old Noah. And they talk about business and entrepreneurship and life. Like they're literally building connection and building a rapport with each other. And it's so for me now, we actually had earlier this year, we had an opportunity, one of the nation's largest franchise corporations, not like a single franchise like a Chick-fil-A, but a corporation that has multiple brands under them. Um, they actually approached us and offered to purchase us, and we easily were able to say no because it doesn't fit into the vision that we have for Fireside of serving the people that we're called to serve and building something that that will go on to future generations.
All right, just a quick message for the folks at Turnkey. We crashed a couple minutes ago, but we're just going to pick it up right from here, and hopefully you guys will fix it in the edit. So we're back. Um, Gar, one more question, and thank you so much for your time. People that start businesses based off of ideas they have or recommendations they may get or opportunities they may see, like a franchise opportunity, sometimes they'll act in haste and obviously regret in leisure. What would you tell someone that is pursuing an entrepreneurial pathway that's running into choppy seas and they're uncertain as to what they've done? At what point do you need to either decide I'm going to push through and persevere, or I'm going to fold up my tent and go try something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I write about that in my real estate story. I write about are you an entrepreneur or a wantrepreneur? And there's a scripture that I love that says the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. Like there's gifts that are in us from the day that we're born. And so I have a little test in that book that says, hey, are you the kind of person you're driving down the road and you start telling your spouse, hey, at dinner last night, wouldn't it have been cool if we had a tool where we could have done this to the spaghetti to make it cook faster? Man, don't you think this would go better if this was like that? If you're always seeing like needs or voids or potential products or services, that's like a real good indicator that you're an entrepreneur. And so the first thing is settling, like, am I an entrepreneur or not? Do I have these core characteristics? And now with AI and stuff like that, right, you could type in there a couple questions, have it ask you, and it could say, yeah, based on these indicators and taking this personality profile test, I believe you are an entrepreneur. But then after that, it's really realizing, like you said, hitting these bumps and stuff in the road is realizing that is part of the process. One of my mentors, Myron Golden, he says, all work works. It either works on you or it works for you. So when you're trying things in the entrepreneurial venture, you're either going to see results that you hope to see when you set out on that path of whatever you're trying to test out, or you're going to bump into roadblocks and stuff like that. Well, just because you bump into a roadblock, it doesn't mean you're headed the wrong direction. It means that hey, here's a hurdle that I need to figure out. And that's one of the things I love about entrepreneurship is it kind of like marriage or parenting, it brings things to surface in us, right? Insecurities and our capabilities or lies that we believe from maybe something that happened during our childhood. And again, to quote Myra Golden, he says, intention or disruption always follows intention. So as we set out on a path to do something, there's always going to be disruption that pops up in front of us. So once we get that settled in our mind as an entrepreneur, that when we're setting on a path and something pops out, that we just say, oh, here's that disruption. Oh, here's that roadblock I was warned about. Cool. And then you actually get excited because you can say, oh, cool, here's the roadblock. I'm excited to see how I'll figure this out. And then you just charge forward. But in my webinar presentation where I talk about franchising, I share a couple of statistics from the SBA. One of them is very common. People know 50% of first-time businesses fail, right? Have you heard that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very common. Well, there's another statistic that isn't so common. 80% of people don't give it a second go about. So 80% of the first-time business that failed, they don't try a second time. So that's a pretty staggering statistic. Like 80% of people don't give it a second shot. Man, that just shows you how, first of all, that shows you how encouraged you should be if you give it another shot, because 80% of your competition's out of the way because they gave up after their first try. And now when you're going into that second try armed with some information,
Sure.
you're like, oh, I've tried this before. I know I'm not going to crank that ad spend up until I first, test my sales pitch on my family and friends or, things like that. So just keep that in mind that all work works. So we just have to get curious and figure out, okay, what just happened there, and then push through that.
That's really great guidance. I mean, having the ability to, as you say, try even when you fail. You don't fail, you're learning. But if you don't move forward, you've wasted all that effort and basically allowed any chance at acquiring wisdom to just vanish right in front of you. Thank you so much for your thoughts. It's really an inspiring story. Our guest today has been Garr Russell from Fireside RVs, the Chief Fire Starter. Where can people find you on the web, Garr? How do they find you if they're interested in doing business with you? Where do they go?
Yeah. If you want to check out firesidervrental.com, you can go on there and find an RV to rent. If you have an RV that you want to put in the program, if you want to learn about the franchise opportunity. And then my book that I mentioned, My Wheel Estate Story, so WHEEL, you can go to mywheelestatestory.com and I give it away for free. You can download it right there for free. Or if you're like me and you want to hold a book in your hands, just look me up on Amazon, Garr Russell, and you'll see my couple books on there that I've got.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah,
you've been listening to Garr Russell, Fireside RVs on If the Public Only Knew. Tune in again for our next interesting story. Be well, Garr. Nice to talk to you.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.